Jake Morrison had exactly 3 rules for surviving in the cargo hauling business. Rule 1, never ask what's in the crates. Rule 2, never get emotionally attached to your clients. And Rule 3, never, under any circumstances, answer distress beacons from unknown vessels, because that's how you end up dead, broke, or worse, involved in someone else's drama. So naturally, as Jake sat in the captain's chair of his ship, the definitely not smuggling, watching a blinking red distress signal on his scanner, he was seriously considering breaking rule number 3. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how you know today was going to be special. "Hey, Rusty," Jake called out to his ship's AI, which he'd named after the rust stains on the bulkhead that looked vaguely like a face. "You seeing this distress beacon too, or did I finally crack from all the freeze-dried protein bars?" "The distress beacon is real, Jake," Rusty replied, in that annoyingly cheerful synthetic voice that all budget AI systems seem to have, "though I should mention that your psychological evaluation is still pending review." "Fantastic, just what I needed to hear." Jake rubbed his stubble and stared at the beacon. 3 days out from the nearest station, hauling a cargo hold full of medical supplies to some mining colony that probably didn't even exist anymore. This was supposed to be easy money. Drop off the goods, collect payment, maybe stop by that cantina on Kepler Station, where they served actual beer instead of that synthetic swill. But here he was, staring at a distress beacon like it was going to solve all his problems, instead of creating entirely new ones. The thing about being a cargo hauler in the Outer Rim was that you learned to mind your own business real quick. The galaxy was full of people who'd gotten themselves into trouble, and most of them deserved whatever mess they'd landed in. Pirates, smugglers, political refugees, religious zealots, you name it. Jake had seen them all, and his policy was simple. Not his circus, not his monkeys. Except sometimes, late at night when the ship was quiet and the stars looked particularly judgmental, Jake wondered if maybe he'd become a little too good at minding his own business. "Distance to the beacon," Jake asked, already knowing he was going to regret this. 2 hours at current speed. The signal is coming from the Xerion system, 4th planet. Mostly uninhabited, rocky terrain, hostile environment. You know the kind of place where good decisions go to die. Did you just make a joke, Rusty? "I've been studying human humor patterns. How am I doing?" "Terribly. Stick to navigation." Jake sighed and looked at his cargo manifest. Medical supplies for colony designation XK7, antibiotics, surgical equipment, emergency rations. The kind of stuff that could save lives if it got where it was supposed to go. The kind of stuff that was also worth a fortune on the black market, which was probably why someone was willing to pay him triple the standard rate to haul it out to the middle of nowhere. "All right, Rusty. Change course for the distress beacon, but if this turns out to be some elaborate pirate trap, I'm blaming you." "Noted. Though I should point out that my insurance policy specifically excludes liability for poor human decision-making." "Of course it does." 2 hours later, Jake was starting to think maybe Rusty's insurance policy had the right idea about human decision-making. The crashed ship looked like someone had taken a perfectly good starfighter and introduced it to a mountain at high velocity. Smoke was still rising from the wreckage, which meant either the crash was recent or the planet's atmosphere was doing something creative with the electronics. "Well, this is promising," Jake muttered, checking his sidearm and environmental suit. "Rusty, any life signs?" "Scanning now. I'm detecting multiple biological signatures inside the wreckage. Also, Jake, I should mention that the ship's configuration matches Luparian design." Jake froze halfway through sealing his helmet. "Come again?" "Luparian. You know, the species that every other civilization in the galaxy considers to be unstoppable killing machines, the ones with the teeth and claws and the charming habit of hunting in packs. Those Luparians." "You're telling me I just diverted my ship to rescue the galactic equivalent of space wolves?" "Well, when you put it like that, it does sound like questionable decision-making." Jake stared at the wreckage through his viewport. Luparians were legendary throughout the galaxy, and not in a good way. They were apex predators who'd evolved on a death world and somehow managed to achieve spaceflight without losing any of their natural hunting instincts. Most species gave them a wide berth, and the few who didn't usually ended up as cautionary tales. "Rusty, remind me again why I thought answering a distress beacon was a good idea." "I believe your exact words were, maybe I've become too good at minding my own business." "Right. Note to self, ignore philosophical moments in the future." But Jake was already suiting up, because apparently his survival instincts had taken a vacation. He grabbed his emergency medical kit and headed for the airlock, muttering about how cargo hauling used to be a nice, boring job, before he developed a conscience. The crash site was even worse up close. The Luparian ship had carved a trench through the rocky terrain before coming to rest against a cliff face. Jake followed the smoke and the sound of what might have been whimpering to a breach in the hull. "Hello?" he called out, immediately feeling ridiculous. "Anyone alive in there?" A low growl answered him, followed by what sounded like a voice speaking in a language that was all consonants and attitude. Jake took a deep breath and squeezed through the breach. The interior of the ship was a mess of sparking electronics and twisted metal, and there, in what used to be the passenger compartment, was a sight that made Jake's brain do a complete system reboot. A Luparian female, easily 7 feet tall even lying down, was propped against a bulkhead with what looked like a serious leg injury. Her fur was a deep silver gray, and her eyes were the kind of gold that belonged on predators who knew exactly how dangerous they were. But what really caught Jake's attention were the 3 small forms huddled against her side. Cubs. 3 Luparian cubs, none of them bigger than a house cat, making soft whimpering sounds that tugged at something in Jake's chest that he'd thought was permanently broken. The female's eyes locked onto Jake, and he could practically see her calculating whether he was a threat or just really stupid. Probably both, if he was being honest. "Well," Jake said, setting down his medical kit slowly, "this is definitely not what I was expecting when I got up this morning." The female said something in Luparian that Jake didn't understand, but the tone was pretty universal. It roughly translated to, "What the hell are you doing here? And why aren't you running away screaming?" "Good question," Jake replied, even though she couldn't understand him. "I'm asking myself the same thing." One of the cubs looked up at him with enormous eyes, and Jake felt his last shred of common sense pack its bags and leave for a nice vacation somewhere far away. "Okay," he said, opening his medical kit. "Let's see what we can do about that leg." Now Jake had been in space long enough to know that this was the moment where smart people backed away slowly, wished everyone the best of luck, and got back to their nice, safe cargo runs. The galaxy was full of tragic stories, and most of them started with someone deciding to be a hero when they should have minded their own business. But as Jake knelt beside the injured Luparian, watching her protective instincts war with her obvious pain, he found himself thinking about the last time he'd walked away from someone who needed help. That had been 3 years ago, on a mining station in the Vega system. A family of refugees, caught in the middle of a corporate war they had nothing to do with. Jake had been hauling supplies just like today, and he'd seen them huddled in the docking bay, waiting for transport that was never coming. He'd walked away that day, told himself it wasn't his problem, that he had his own life to worry about. Found out later that the station had been attacked 2 days after he left. No survivors. "Yeah, that's not happening again," Jake muttered, pulling out his scanner to get a better look at the Luparian's injuries. The female watched him with those predator eyes, every muscle tense despite her obvious pain. She said something else in Luparian, and this time Jake caught a word that sounded like cubs. Universal translator or not, some things didn't need translation. "Easy there, Mama Wolf," Jake said, keeping his voice calm. "I'm not here to hurt anyone. Well, except maybe my own life expectancy." Her leg was badly broken, probably from the crash impact. Without proper medical attention, she wasn't going anywhere, and on a hostile planet like this, that was basically a death sentence. The cubs were uninjured but clearly distressed, making those soft whimpering sounds that were doing serious damage to Jake's carefully maintained emotional defenses. "Rusty," Jake said into his comm, "I need you to cross-section Luparian physiology with human medical protocols. What can I do for a broken leg?" "Jake, I feel obligated to remind you that Luparians are widely considered to be the most dangerous predators in known space. Their bite force can crush titanium, their claws can shred battle armor, and they have a cultural tradition of hunting anything that moves. Perhaps this would be a good time to reconsider your career choices." "Yeah, well, look at them, Rusty. They're not exactly hunting anything right now." One of the cubs had crept closer to Jake, nose twitching as it tried to figure out what this strange, hairless creature was. It was about the size of a kitten, with oversized paws and that fluffy fur that all baby animals seem to have. Its eyes were the same gold as its mother's, but filled with curiosity instead of calculation. "Oh, come on," Jake said to the universe in general. "Really? You're going to make them cute? That's just playing dirty." The female Luparian had been watching this exchange with growing confusion. Here was a human, a species she'd been taught to view as unpredictable and potentially dangerous, kneeling beside her with what looked like medical equipment. Humans were known for their strange behavior, but this was bizarre even by their standards. Jake started setting up a portable bone mender, one of the pieces of medical equipment he'd been hauling to the colony. It was designed for human physiology, but the basic principles should work on any carbon-based life form. Probably. Maybe. He was about to find out. Look, I know we can't understand each other, Jake said to the female, but I'm going to try to help with that leg. This might hurt a bit, but it's better than the alternative. The female studied him for a long moment, then did something that surprised Jake. She spoke a single word in heavily accented standard. Why? Jake paused, the bone mender halfway to her injured leg. You speak standard? Little, she replied, her voice a low growl that somehow managed to convey both pride and desperation. Why help? Humans fear Luparians. Yeah, well, Jake said, activating the bone mender. I've always been bad at following conventional wisdom. Besides, someone once told me that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about being afraid and doing the right thing anyway. The female winced as the bone mender began its work, but she didn't make a sound. Cubs, she said simply. Yeah, Jake replied, understanding perfectly. Cubs. Sometimes the most important decisions came down to the simplest reasons. Jake had spent 3 years telling himself that keeping his distance was the smart play, that getting involved was a good way to end up dead. But looking at those 3 small forms, huddled against their injured mother, he realized that some things were worth the risk. Even if those things had teeth and claws and belonged to a species that most of the galaxy considered to be nightmare fuel. The bone mender worked faster than Jake had expected, which was good news since he was starting to hear warning alarms from the crashed ship's systems. Apparently, whatever had brought down a Lupardian fighter wasn't done causing problems. There, Jake said, checking the readout on the medical device. That should stabilize the fracture. You'll need proper medical attention at a station, but it should hold for now. The female tested her leg carefully, then looked at Jake with an expression that might have been gratitude if he was reading Luparian body language correctly, which, let's be honest, he probably wasn't. Name? She asked in her heavily accented standard. Jake Morrison, and you are? Kira, pack leader of the Moonhunt clan. She gestured toward the cubs. My sons. Fenris, Howl, and Scar. Jake looked at the 3 balls of fluff currently investigating his boots. Scar? Really? That one? He pointed to the smallest cub, who was currently trying to chew on his laces with tiny teeth. He will grow into it, Kira said, with what Jake was pretty sure was Luparian humor. Right, well, Kira, I hate to break up this touching moment, but your ship is making some very unfriendly noises. We need to get you and the boys out of here before something explodes. Getting 3 curious cubs and an injured adult Luparian from the crash site to Jake's ship turned out to be an adventure in itself. The cubs kept wandering off to investigate interesting rocks, strange smells, and what appeared to be absolutely nothing at all. Jake found himself constantly counting heads like a stressed-out kindergarten teacher. Fenris, get away from that smoking wreckage. Howl, stop trying to eat the poisonous plants. Scar, how did you even get up there? Kira watched this display with growing amusement. You have cubs? She asked. No, but I'm starting to understand why some species eat their young. Jake replied, scooping up Scar from where he'd somehow managed to climb onto a boulder twice his size. Luparians do not eat cubs, Kira said, seriously. It was a joke. Humans make jokes when they're stressed. It's one of our many charming quirks. Humans are strange, Kira observed, limping along beside him. You have no idea. Getting everyone aboard the definitely not smuggling required some creative problem-solving. Jake's ship wasn't exactly designed for passengers, especially passengers who came with 3 energetic cubs that treated everything as a potential chew toy. Rusty, Jake called out as they reached the cargo hold. I'm bringing guests aboard. Try not to be weird about it. Define weird, Rusty replied through the comm system. You know what I mean. Actually, I don't. My programming includes 17 different definitions of weird, and humans seem to apply them randomly. Kira's ears pricked up at the sound of Rusty's voice. Your ship speaks? It's an AI, artificial intelligence. And before you ask, no, it's not very intelligent. I heard that, Rusty said. You were supposed to. The cubs immediately began exploring their new environment with the focused intensity of tiny furry scientists. Within minutes, they'd managed to open 3 storage lockers, knock over a stack of supply crates, and discover that the ship's environmental controls made interesting beeping sounds when poked. Your cubs are very active, Jake said diplomatically. People are young, Kira replied. At this age they learn through exploration and play. It is natural behavior. Right. Natural. Jake watched Fenris systematically dismantle a spare communications array. Maybe we should find them something less expensive to explore. Kira made a sound that might have been a laugh. You are not what I expected from a human. Yeah, I get that a lot. What did you expect? Fear. Aggression. Most species flee when they see Luparians. Those who do not flee usually attack. Jake considered this while prying Howl away from the ship's main power coupling. Must get lonely. The simple comment seemed to catch Kira off guard. She looked at Jake with those predator eyes, but for the first time Jake saw something else there. Sadness, maybe, or recognition. Yes, she said quietly. It does. Well, for what it's worth, you're not what I expected either. What did you expect? Jake thought about it. Honestly? Slavering monsters with a taste for human flesh. The reputation your species has out there is pretty intense. We are warriors, Kira said with obvious pride. We do not back down from threats. We protect our own. But we are not monsters. No, Jake agreed, watching Scar curl up for a nap in a pile of shipping blankets. I can see that. Jake, Rusty interrupted, I'm detecting several ships approaching our position. They appear to be scanning for life signs. Jake's blood went cold. What kind of ships? Configuration suggests bounty hunters. 3 vessels, heavily armed. They'll be within weapons range in approximately 10 minutes. Kira was on her feet instantly, despite her injury. They hunt us, she said grimly. There is a bounty on Luparan heads. Large bounty. How large? Jake asked, though he was already moving toward the cockpit. Enough to buy a new ship, maybe 2 ships. Jake paused at the hatch. And you're telling me this because? Because you have helped us. You deserve to know the cost of your kindness. Jake looked at her, then at the 3 cubs who were now huddled against their mother's side, sensing the tension in the air. He thought about the cargo hold full of medical supplies, about the easy money waiting at the colony, about his 3 rules for staying alive in a dangerous galaxy. Rusty, he said. Fire up the engines, we're leaving. Jake, perhaps this would be a good time to reconsider. Not now, Rusty, just get us out of here. Kira watched him with those gold eyes. You could collect the bounty. I would not blame you. Yeah, well, Jake said, settling into the pilot's seat. I've always been terrible at making sensible financial decisions. As the ship lifted off, Jake caught sight of the approaching bounty hunters in his rear display. 3 ships, just like Rusty had said. Professional, well-armed, and probably not the type to ask questions first. Hold on, Jake called back to his passengers. This is going to get interesting. And that, as it turned out, was the understatement of the year. Rusty, tell me you have some brilliant tactical analysis about our current predicament, Jake said, watching the bounty hunter's ships close in on his scanner. Well, Jake, the good news is that your ship is significantly faster than theirs in a straight line. The bad news is that they have superior firepower, better shields, and what appears to be a tactical coordination system that suggests they've done this before. Fantastic. Any other cheerful observations? Also, one of them is hailing us. Jake sighed. Put them through. The comm crackled to life with a voice that sounded like it had been marinated in cheap whiskey and bad decisions. Attention cargo hauler. This is Captain Vex of the hunter vessel Payday. We have scanned your ship and detected Luparian life signs. Surrender the targets peacefully and you will be compensated for your trouble. Jake looked back at Kira, who was crouched protectively over her cubs. The 3 little ones were pressed against her, no longer playful but alert and frightened. It was amazing how quickly they'd gone from curious explorers to a terrified family. How much compensation are we talking about? Jake asked into the comm. Jake, Kira said sharply, but he held up a hand. 100,000 credits for the adult female, 50,000 each for the cubs, Vex replied. More than enough to buy yourself a better ship and a comfortable retirement. Jake whistled low. That's a lot of money. It is indeed. What do you say, cargo hauler? Easy money, no questions asked. Jake looked at his scanner again. The bounty hunters had formed a loose triangle around his ship, cutting off his escape routes. Professional work. They'd done this dance before. I have a counter-proposal, Jake said into the comm. How about you take your generous offer and shove it where the cosmic radiation doesn't shine? The silence that followed was broken by Rusty's synthetic voice. Jake, I believe you may have just escalated this situation unnecessarily. Sometimes, unnecessary escalation is the most human thing you can do, Jake replied, then switched back to the comm. Besides, I'm curious to see what these fancy bounty hunters can do against good old-fashioned human stubbornness. The response was immediate and predictable. Energy blasts lit up the space around Jake's ship as all 3 hunters opened fire. The definitely not smuggling might have been fast, but it wasn't exactly built for combat. Jake threw the ship into a wild corkscrew maneuver that had everyone except the Cubs pressed against the bulkheads. "Okay, new plan," Jake called out over the sound of straining engines. "We're going to do something stupid." "That's not a plan," Kira said through gritted teeth. "That's a suicide wish." "Welcome to humanity," Jake replied, diving toward the planet's surface. "We specialize in stupid plans that somehow work." The bounty hunters followed, but Jake had one advantage they didn't: desperation mixed with a complete disregard for manufacturer safety recommendations. He pushed the ship's engines past their recommended limits, diving through the planet's atmosphere at speeds that made the hull groan in protest. "Jake," Rusty said with what sounded like genuine concern, "my calculations suggest that this approach angle will result in catastrophic structural failure in approximately 3 minutes." "Your calculations don't account for the Jake Morrison factor," Jake replied, pulling up just before they hit the mountain range. The ship's belly scraped against the rocky peaks, sending showers of sparks through the cargo hold. Behind them, the bounty hunters were having trouble matching his maneuver. One of them pulled up too late and clipped a mountain peak, sending his ship spinning into a crash landing. The other two were still in pursuit, but they were being more cautious now. "See," Jake said, "sometimes stupid works." That's when little Scar decided to help. The smallest cub had been watching the chase with those big gold eyes, and something about the stress in the air seemed to trigger his instincts. He let out a sound that Jake had never heard before. Not a whimper or a growl, but something that seemed to vibrate through the ship's hull itself. "What was that?" Jake asked, but Kira was already moving. "Scar, no," she said in Luparian, but it was too late. The cub's howl was answered by his brother's, and suddenly the cargo hold was filled with a harmonic sound that made Jake's teeth ache. "Rusty, are you picking this up on external sensors?" "Yes, Jake. The sonic resonance is being transmitted through the ship's hull. It's quite remarkable, actually." One of the pursuing bounty hunters suddenly veered off course, his ship's systems apparently affected by the Keb's combined howl. Jake watched in amazement as the hunter's vessel began to shake apart, pieces of hull plating flying off into space. "Well," Jake said, "that's new." The third bounty hunter, Captain Vex, was made of sterner stuff. His ship kept coming, weapons blazing, but Jake could see on his sensors that the sonic attack was affecting his pursuit craft's systems too. Lights were flickering on the hunter's bridge, and his shots were becoming increasingly erratic. "Kira, can you get them to do that again?" Jake asked. "It is not something they control," Kira replied, but she was looking at her cubs with obvious pride. "They are young. Their abilities are still developing. But in times of great stress, sometimes the pack instincts emerge." "Pack instincts?" "Luparians hunt in coordinated groups. Our howl can disorient prey, disrupt their systems. But these are cubs. They should not be able to do this yet." Jake grinned. "Yeah, well, today's been full of surprises." The third bounty hunter was still pursuing, but his ship was clearly struggling. Jake could see smoke coming from his engines, and his weapon systems had gone offline. Time for the coup de grace. "Hey, Vex," Jake called over the comm. "You still there?" "What did you do to my ship?" Vex snarled back. "Nothing. That was all them. Turns out Luparian cubs are even more dangerous than advertised. Who knew?" "This isn't over, cargo hauler." "Yeah, it is," Jake said, watching the bounty hunter's ship limp away into space. "And next time, maybe pick on someone who doesn't have a pack of space wolves watching his back." As the immediate danger passed, Jake felt something he hadn't experienced in years. He was part of something bigger than himself. Kira was looking at him with what could only be described as respect, and the cubs were curled up together, exhausted from their first real hunt. "So," Jake said, settling back into his pilot's seat, "anyone know a good place to get some rest? Because I have a feeling this is just the beginning." Scar looked up at him with those enormous eyes and made a small sound that might have been agreement, or maybe he was just asking for food. With cubs, it was hard to tell. But for the first time in 3 years, Jake Morrison felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. 3 days later, Jake was docked at Haven Station, a neutral port that asked no questions and kept no records. It was the kind of place where a human cargo hauler and a family of Luparians could catch their breath without worrying about bounty hunters or galactic politics. The cubs had adapted to ship life with the resilience that seemed to be hardwired into their species. Fenris had claimed the co-pilot's chair as his personal throne. Howell had discovered that the ship's ventilation system made excellent climbing routes, and Scar had appointed himself as Jake's personal shadow, following him everywhere with the devotion of a particularly fuzzy stalker. "You know," Jake said to Kira as they watched the cubs play in the cargo hold, I'm starting to think you guys aren't the terrifying monsters the galaxy makes you out to be. Kira's ears flicked in what Jake had learned was Luparian amusement. We can be terrifying when we need to be, but we are also family. Pack, these things matter more than reputation. Yeah, I'm starting to figure that out. Jake had spent the last 3 days learning more about Luparian culture than he'd ever expected to know. They weren't the mindless predators that galactic propaganda made them out to be. They were complex, intelligent beings, with their own codes of honor and family structures. The fact that they looked like something out of humanity's ancestral nightmares was just an unfortunate coincidence. I have contacted my clan, Kira said, settling beside him. They will meet us at the Kepler Junction in 2 days. You will be rewarded for your help. I don't want a reward, Jake said automatically, then caught himself. I mean, I wouldn't say no to having my ship repaired. Those bounty hunters did a number on my stabilizers. It will be done, but Jake Morrison, you have given us something more valuable than credits. You have given us our lives. In Luparian culture, this creates a bond that cannot be broken. Jake looked at her, trying to read the expression on her wolf-like features. What kind of bond? You are Pack now, part of our family. If you ever need help, you call, and we will come. No matter where you are, no matter what the danger. That's actually kind of terrifying, Jake admitted. Good, it should be. Scar chose that moment to waddle over and climb into Jake's lap, curling up like an oversized kitten. Jake found himself automatically scratching behind the cub's ears, which earned him a contented rumble that vibrated through his chest. He likes you, Kira observed. Yeah, well, the feeling's mutual. But what happens when he's not cute anymore? When he's 7 feet tall with claws that can shred battle armor? Then he will still be Scar. He will still remember the human who helped his family when no one else would. Cubs do not forget kindness. Jake looked down at the small form in his lap. It was hard to imagine this ball of fluff growing up to be one of the galaxy's most feared predators. But then again, 3 days ago, he couldn't have imagined himself adopting a family of space wolves either. Rusty, Jake called out, plot a course for the Kepler Junction. Time to get our passengers home. Course plotted, Jake. Though I should mention, the Cubs have somehow managed to reprogram my humor subroutines. I now have access to approximately 3,000 Luparian jokes, most of which involve hunting and pack dynamics. Please tell me you're not going to start telling them. When did the Luparian cross the space lane? Rusty asked cheerfully. I'm not answering that. To get to the other prey. Jake groaned. Kira, your kids broke my AI. They are very clever, she replied with obvious pride. They take after their mother. 2 days later, Jake found himself at the Kepler Junction, surrounded by more Luparian ships than he'd ever seen in one place. The Cubs were practically vibrating with excitement at the prospect of seeing their extended family, while Kira stood at the viewport with a dignity that reminded Jake why her species commanded respect across the galaxy. That's the clan flagship, she said, pointing to a massive vessel that looked like it had been designed by someone who believed form should follow function, and function should be intimidating. My brother commands it. Is he going to try to eat me? Jake asked, only half joking. Probably not, but he will want to test you. It is tradition. Test me how? You will see. And Jake did see, about an hour later, when he found himself face to face with the largest Luparian he'd ever encountered. Kira's brother, who went by the name Grimjaw, was easily 8 feet tall and built like a battleship. His greeting consisted of a bone-crushing handshake and a stare that seemed to look directly into Jake's soul. So, Grimjaw said in perfect standard, you are the human who helped my sister. That's me, Jake Morrison, professional Good Samaritan and part-time idiot. Grimjaw's laugh was like an avalanche. I like him, he announced to the assembled Luparians. He has humor in the face of danger. This is good. What followed was the strangest farewell party Jake had ever attended. The Luparians, it turned out, knew how to celebrate. There was food, there was drink that could probably power a small starship, and there were stories that painted a picture of a species that was far more complex than their reputation suggested. The Cubs, now surrounded by dozens of relatives, were in heaven. They regaled everyone with tales of their adventure, complete with dramatic reenactments of the bounty hunter chase. Jake found himself being described as some kind of heroic figure, which was both flattering and deeply embarrassing. You know, he said to Kira during a quiet moment, I'm going to miss having them around. Ship's going to seem pretty empty without the sound of tiny claws on the deck plates. They will miss you too, she replied. But this is not goodbye forever. Pack bonds are not easily broken. She was right, of course. Over the next few months, Jake found his cargo runs taking him to systems where Luparian ships just happened to be passing through. Coincidence, they called it, but Jake knew better. Fenris was growing into his role as a future pack leader. Howl had discovered a talent for ship engineering that impressed even human technicians, and Scar had developed into a master of what Jake could only describe as adorable intimidation. They would calm him with updates on their training, their adventures, their growing understanding of the galaxy beyond their homeworld. And Jake, despite himself, found that he looked forward to these calls more than he cared to admit. "So," Rusty said one day as they were hauling a load of terraforming equipment to a frontier world, "how does it feel to be the galaxy's first human pack member?" Jake thought about it as he watched the stars stream past the viewport. His ship was quieter now, more organized and significantly less likely to be destroyed by curious cubs. But it was also lonelier, and he found himself missing the chaos that came with having a family aboard. "You know what, Rusty, it feels pretty good. Even though it's completely changed your life? Especially because it's completely changed my life." Jake Morrison had started this journey as a man who minded his own business, who kept his distance from other people's problems, who had 3 rules for staying safe in a dangerous galaxy. He was ending it as someone who had learned that sometimes the most important connections come from the most unexpected places. And if that meant occasionally having to explain to customs officials why his ship's interior had claw marks on every available surface, well, that was a small price to pay for belonging to something bigger than himself. "Besides," Jake added, settling back in his pilot's seat, "I've always been terrible at following rules anyway." Behind him, the comm system chimed with an incoming message. Jake smiled as he recognized the frequency. Pack bonds, it seemed, were indeed not easily broken. And, honestly, that was exactly the way he liked it.